Mami Kataoka will now introduce the roundtable with a presentation about social changes and contemporary art towards new public. Please welcome Mami Kataoka. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I was given 20 minutes. I'm trying to include 150 years of history in 20 minutes, so I might be a little quick. Because I was fascinated by your environment that finally becoming towards the democracy and what could happen in terms of the art practices. And I thought maybe we should go back to the beginning of modernization and civilization in Japan, which we need to go back to 1868. And that was the time the idea of a Western sense of fine art was imported. And particularly when Japan first officially participated in Vienna Expo in 1873, there was a category of the fine art, so there needed to be a word translated to Japanese. So the word bijutsu, like meishu in Chinese, was invented for this participation. And then also the form of art exhibition was also prepared for this participation for the Vienna Expo. And so a year earlier in Tokyo, the first art exhibition in Japan was held to see, you could see what they were preparing is kind of different kind of bars and mostly crafts. So that was the thing that they thought it's a good thing to introduce from Japan to the West. And art education-wise, the Japanese government invited many Westerners to teach politics and philosophy. And one of the person called Ernest Fenollosa, who came from Boston, actually came to teach politics and philosophy, but he was traveling around the regional part of Japan and found Japanese traditional art very important. And around that time, Japanese government was more towards the Western art. So a lot of people are throwing away the important Buddhist statues and traditional artifacts. So he kind of saved what we had traditionally. And then one of the men called Tenshin Okakura, who traveled with Fenollosa in the whole nation as a translator, and he became a very important figure to become the first principal of Tokyo University of Arts and Art when he was still 27 or 28 years old. And he traveled to India and had a friendship with Rabindranath Tagore and started to work for Boston Fine Art Museum in 1904. And he ended up becoming head of Chinese and Japanese department at Boston Fine Art Museum in 1910. And you can see that how art school was teaching both traditional art form, Japanese painting and Western painting. So this is the painting vertically is Westerner, and the horizontal way of any kind of calligraphy or Japanese painting horizontal. Then he was also looking for a way to find, while keeping the Japanese pigment, the traditional pigment, but normally it starts from the lines, like fine lines. So how could we paint the Japanese painting without based on the lines? So this was criticized as a moral type, which means more kind of dizzy, not clear, and but it kind of symbolized some of the struggles of the artists around that time. And then also he is Kuroda Seiki, was regarded as the father of Western style painting in Japan. And this is one of the most well-known picture incorporating outdoor light. And so it's called like School for Outdoor Light. And some of the struggles, we can also see it from this painting by Yuichi Takahashi, using oil paint. So the material is completely Western style oil painting, but he selected a motif as very ordinary Japanese material as a tofu. So like a different kind of tofu. Some are fried, some are grilled, some are like raw tofu, but trying to depict the different materiality of the subject matter through oil painting. So there had been always the struggle between the Japanese tradition and Western idea of art and paintings. And that continues throughout the time. But particularly after the war, from 1945 and 52 onwards, and Japan experienced the occupation by the Allied forces for 6-7 years, and then went to post-war era. But we can find the direct reaction to the war and during the wartime, and some of the trauma from the war and the defeated in battle, and these are easily found in the painting around this time of 1940s. And so the Taro Okamoto in The Dark Night, and then also Masao Tsuruoka is a heavy hand. You can really see that what kind of burden or sort of a heavy trauma was on their shoulders. And then 1952, Japan recovered from this occupation time, and it's the treaty was made in San Francisco, it's called the San Francisco Treaty. And but that caused many new social issues, including the return of Japan was on the basis of U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, so that Japan had to become a kind of like a guard in a Cold War structure. So a lot of U.S. military forces started to come in on the land of Japan. So there are a lot of struggles, and the farmers are taking their farmland. So a lot of struggles against the U.S. camp and military forces. So some of the paintings from 1950s are depicting these difficulties. For instance, this painting by Hiroshi Nakamura, 1957, it's directly called The Base, and inspired from the fact that one of the U.S. soldier was welcoming a farmer lady in one of the area. And then as soon as she came into the base, the soldier shot her from the back and killed the farmer lady. And so these kind of incidents happened quite a lot. And he was really trying to sort of depict those moments. And also nuclear power experiments. A lot of things that happened in the Pacific Ocean. So many fishermen had effect from those things. So the artists like Ikeda Tatsuo had been painting like 10,000 count. It's a count of the Geiger counter. And then also the struggle of the fisherman's boats. And these kind of paintings are sort of alternative currents against the group of artists who are following the modernity or modernism art. But also, as soon as the Japan recovers the autonomy, 1951 was the first public museum of modern art in Japan, in Kamakura, and designed by the pupil of Le Corbusier. And so this really shows the kind of a thirst for the Japanese art community to come back to the international art. So to introduce the modern and contemporary art of Japan to the world and the Japanese public in an effort to promote mutual understanding between Japan and the world, also to define the place of contemporary Japanese art within a large context of international art. So this you can find in their website. So you can really share that how much that they wanted to be part of the international context. And 1952, the following year, was the beginning of the first National Museum of Modern Art. And Kamakura was only the municipal museum. So 52 was celebrating the first National Museum of Modern Art and modeled after Museum of Modern Art in New York. So the departments are divided into different the technique of medium. So painting and sculpture department, print and photography department, and these are really modeled after New York style. And then they moved the building in 1969 to the current building. But it has been always, there had been a lot of exhibition comparing East and West. And how can you find the position in the international art community or international art history had been a major concern for Japan for a long time. And by the 60s, we had the 1964 Tokyo Olympic. And for preparing a Tokyo Olympic, the city infrastructure changed so much. So they built a Tokyo Tower, they built a Metropolitan Highway, and then also they started to run the bullet train. And so the Olympic, invitation of Olympic marked the sort of the modern infrastructure, and also marks the recovery from the war. But some of the avant-garde art group was already teasing the funny sort of the face to the international society, that how Japan became more modernized or clean. So one of the group called High Red Center did this performance called the Tokyo Mixer Plan and Be Clean event in 1964, exactly during the Tokyo Olympic time. So people are so happy about Japan becoming more clean, but they are cleaning every corner of one street in the area called the Ginza, and I'm sure it was illegal, but because they were cleaning, which are considered as something good, so whenever like police pass by, they're like, so no stopping. And but also 1964, the traveling law changed. So individual could become, they could travel to abroad without much to the places without visa. And so from 1950s to 60s, many artists left Japan and wanted to live in the West. And many people who came from the wealthy family started to move in the 50s, but after 1964, they could move or travel more easily. So that was kind of like a concentrated moment that very important artists like Yayoi Kusama, Yoko Ono, or Onkawara, and these super international artists now left country around that time. Also, some of the interesting example of how Japan wanted to be international, but wasn't really acceptable from the West. The exhibition curated by the Museum of Modern Art in 1965 called the New Japanese Painting and Sculpture. And they invited around 46 artists, and 30 came from Japan, and all other came from New York, Paris, Milan, and Rome. But so they were kind of proud to be how much they are catching up the Western arts currency. But there is a very interesting the news review from the New York Times. It says, "What do you mean new?" And it says the old international cliche emblemed. And it's almost like, looks like a funeral parlor. So it said it's so old that what Japan is doing. And that was a gap between what Japan was thinking and then also how, or what they were expecting actually from Japan. And in 1970, we had Osaka Expo. That was also a symbol of harmony and then also new technology. So a lot of architects, artists, and then also musicians, they all collaborated. And this is a symbolic big roof, and designed by Kenzo Tange, the father of modern architecture in Japan. And this is the sculpture is by Taro Okamoto, the avant-garde artist. So we say this is the only moment that the art defeated the architects by making them decide to make a hole on the bigger roof. But this was the tower is remaining in Osaka. And inside is an incredible kind of sculpture inside, but it's been closed. But I think they're opening up now again. And also there was an interesting exhibition called Tokyo Biennale, 1970. And this is also regarded as one of the first international art exhibition. And it's called the 10th Japan International Art Exhibition, but actually this was the first real international art exhibition, and then also the last. Because the curator was the art critic, invited many arte povera artists and then also performance artists, and it was the first time that the artists didn't send anything to Japan, and then they bought some materials or found some materials and made the work on site. So that was very new for the museum people in Japan, and they thought that was too much, so they couldn't continue afterwards. But clearly the curator for this show, Yusuke Nakahara, knew about important exhibitions happened in Europe in the previous year, called When Attitude Became Form. And also the emergence of arte povera and this group of sort of performative on-site installation art. So in a way that people knew a lot of things that what was happening in Europe without internet. But that was a time that not only when attitude became form in Europe, but also in the same year in Whitney Museum American Art, there was the anti-illusion, producers and materials. That was really the moment that people are really looking at the performative installation sculptures. And the 1970 Tokyo Biennale truly reflect this international movement. And we could probably look at this figure, that shifting Japanese economy in 1960 onwards. So after the end of the war and throughout the 60s, and Japan was like growing, and GDP, the average GDP was more or less around 10%. And from 1974 to 1990s was still like more than 4%. And then 1989 was the end of developing or proceeding. And we had been having like 20 years of post-war, post-bubble economy. But something important is, when you recover economically and society become more stable and acquired some sort of peace, and there had been important statistics from 1970s to onward, that around the end of the 70s, when the economical situation became better, everyone has a house and cars and all this kind of middle class, the life has been achieved. Then this is a statistics that government census asked, what do you think is more important? Is it material richness or mental happiness? And so around the end of 1970s, the people think the mental happiness is more important than material richness. So people realize that even you have house and cars and everything, it doesn't mean that you become happier. And so this figure has been used very often by the government, saying the importance of arts and culture or cultural policies to be more incorporated. And so from 80s throughout 90s, there had been a lot of new museums had been built. And it has been actually a shift from privately funded museums to the public funded museums throughout 90s. Like in 70s towards 99, Seven Saison Museum was most important museums, bringing Jasper Johns, Master Duchamp, and they even invited Joseph Beuys to do a performance. Very timely museum, but they had to stop because of the business collapsing. And alternative space called the Sagacho Exhibit Space, Tokyo Museum of Contemporary Art, P3 Art and Environment, ICA Nagoya, all of these were the most exciting place when I was in my 20s. And but only Hara Museum of Contemporary Art remained existing today, and all of them, all other disappeared. Because after 1989, the marking, like Hiroshima Contemporary Art Museum became the first contemporary art museum run by public money or municipal government. And then followed by Mito Art Center, Museum of Contemporary Art in Tokyo, and Fukuoka Asian Art Museum. And a lot of them are kind of an art complex, learning from sort of Barbican Center or South Bank Center in British style. So Mito Art Center had a concert hall, theater, and an art gallery. And Museum of Contemporary Art in Tokyo, it's museum alone, but a gigantic building. And also Tokyo Opera City Arts Gallery, which I actually started in '99, is part of the larger complex with office tower, National Opera Theater, concert hall, and a place for contemporary art. And so the place like the Mori Art Museum, where I work now, was established in 2003. And again, it's within a larger shopping mall business complex. So we just have so many people coming to the complex. And this is the picture from our 10th anniversary of the exhibition about love. And nearly 500,000 people came. And because it's within the larger complex, and then we can advertise using Jeff Koons' image all over, and just people love the idea of the love. And we also open from 10 to 10, so it matches to urban lifestyle, so that they can even come after the dinner. So this has been really a shift of how contemporary art has been incorporated into people's life. But also, I wanted to mention the changing environment of contemporary art. Maybe it's too little for you to see it. Maybe it's too small. But it's always, I think, there is a kind of a set of the patterns that artists makes works at any time of the place or history. And then it's organically, when there's no place to show, artists become collective and then try to find a place to show their work. So very initial form of showing the work is mostly artist-run space or sort of alternative space. And some started to go to the commercial direction so that they can start selling their work. And sometimes artist-run space and commercial gallery have same function. So this division between two are not necessarily always clear. But anyway, either collector collects so many works and donate to the art museum, or artists directly bring the works to the museum. And somehow the form of art museum originated from the Europe, this the idea of the bourgeoisie was trying to open up their personal collection to the public. And the idea of a curator, from the Latin word curare, it means caretaker. So curators were hired to physically and then also academically take care of the works that they have in the museum. So this was the very simple form of one city could have this kind of diagram. But what's happening now in the last 20 years is it's becoming far more complicated because we have Biennale, Triennale Art Festival, which is just enormous amount of festivals in any kind of regions, particularly after 1990s in the last 20 years. And then also increasing number of art fairs also happening in many cities. So commercial gallery does not have to stay in one city. They can have other branches, like White Cube has Rome, London, and Hong Kong. It's kind of like a corporate. And then art fair became the place to sell the work. So some of the New York galleries even, they sell more than 80% of the work in different art fairs, not in the art gallery in New York, where they are based. So the work curators are required, not only the art museum, but also Biennale, Triennale, they need curators to make a selection of the works and it sets the theme. And now even art fair needs a curator to make a curated section so that it becomes not only a commercial place. And even commercial gallery hire a curator to curate the show. So I think a curator will never be out of the business. And there's so many levels of curating. And on the other hand, there was an article in The Economist magazine in December last year that they're saying that audience for the contemporary art is ever growing. And Paul Schimmel, the former LA MoCA curator, is saying that interest in contemporary art is much broader, much richer, and much deeper than it was when I started out 30 years ago. So we have more and more public coming to the larger institutions. And this is also the figure that the Economist included. So the Tate has more than 5 million people coming to Tate Modern. And in 2000, I think this was the opening year. And followed by Pompidou and Museum of Modern Art. And so all these places have more than 1 million visitors a year. And that means that when the contemporary art was shared by the smaller art community, so contemporary art was a small number of artwork and a little audience. But now when the contemporary art environment in many cities became so complicated that what we are doing now is the artwork from diverse social, political, historical contexts in global art community became so complicated and complex, but we have a much larger audience coming to the contemporary art. So the major issue for contemporary art museums now is how they could be a new platform to connect ever complex contemporary art to the ever expanding public. I don't think that Myanmar is in this stage yet, but what's going to happen any of the city is that once you are kind of economically developed and life is fulfilled, and maybe the people need something more than just material richness, and then you might have bigger museums, and but it's not simple. And contemporary art is really talking about very complex emotion and historical context and social context. So how do you also reach out to the new public or new audience is the coming issue that you may encounter. But I'm very interested in how you develop your art community in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.